Salut French students, ça va? Welcome to video 5 of chapitre 3, and you will see the topic of this video is le verbe avoir. So up to now, one of the major verbs that we've learned earlier in the semester in the earlier chapters was the verb être, to be, and we've used that quite a lot. And just like in English, the verb to be is kind of a foundation for everything. We use the verb to be for everything, to talk about ourselves, to talk about others. It's a state of being. It's just an extremely common verb. We need to be able to talk about our existence. And another very common verb, like we'll see in English, is the verb to have. And we use the verb to have to form other tenses in English, like the present perfect. I can say, I have traveled many times since 1995, okay? Or he has done that several times. Or they had done that before they did that other thing. So we use the verbs have and has and had in the past to form lots of different verbs in English, and it's the same way in French. So avoir is the equivalent of to have in English, and you'll see as you learn more advanced tenses, if you continue on with your French studies in French 102 and maybe even into 200 level French, you will see that the verbs être and avoir are essential. You need to know both of them inside and out. They need to be automatic, and you actually have to choose between them to form different verbs in the past tense. Okay, so as we see here, to say what someone has, we use the verb avoir. So this is a similar pronunciation to words like soir. Okay, so that OI combination sounds like wa, avoir. And its conjugation is irregular, just like the verb être. And it's very often that these really common verbs in a language, just like to be in English, to be is an irregular verb. It has a different form for every person. And that's basically what irregular means. You'll see that these very common verbs do tend to have these irregular forms. And I guess, we use them so often we don't even think about whether they're regular or irregular. So just to go through the pronunciation, you'll notice that there are a few parts of this conjugation that have a liaison, and that's where you see that z sound. But we'll go through all 6 forms. So j'ai is I have, tu as is you have, il, elle, on a would be he, she, it, or we have, nous avons, we have, vous avez, you have, either formal you or a plural group of all of you, ils ont or elles ont. So they have either a masculine, feminine, or a mixed group of masculine, feminine. Okay, so another thing they tell us here at the bottom of this slide is when you use the verb avoir and you're using it to talk about what you have, quantities of things, you kind of have to remember to use de or de apostrophe, the D apostrophe, rather than de, to talk about different quantities of things. So we see this with combien, how much or how many, with beaucoup, which is a lot, and assez, which is like rather or pretty much. Okay, so if, for example, I'm going to put some sample sentences on here. Well, it actually doesn't let me type that in there, does it? So let's go ahead and add a text box. Okay, so for example, if I were to say, okay, j'ai combien, it's going to autocorrect me, combien de légumes? Oops. Well, all right, there we go. Okay, so I'm basically saying I have how many vegetables. Okay, so combien de, I wouldn't say combien de. Okay, so when I'm talking about a quantity, I'm going to use de instead of de. Okay, so I can do the same thing with beaucoup. J'ai beaucoup d'amis. Okay, Okay, so in this case, I'm talking about a noun that begins with a vowel. With légumes, it begins with a consonant, so I said de légumes. So j'ai beaucoup d'amis. Okay, I wouldn't say j'ai beaucoup d'amis because it sounds kind of strange to do that, so I'm going to make a contraction out of it. I could do it with a word that begins with a consonant. So j'ai beaucoup de livres. Okay, so I have many books. In this case, I'm saying beaucoup de in front of the noun that begins with a consonant, livres. Okay, the other one that they mentioned was j'ai assez de vêtements. Okay, we just learned this in the previous video, I think. So clothes. I have enough clothes. I wouldn't say j'ai assez de vêtements. J'ai assez de vêtements. Or j'ai assez de voitures. We just learned this in our last video. So I have enough cars. I think only if you have lots and lots of money can you form that sentence. J'ai assez de voitures. So in all of these cases, when I'm talking about a quantity of something with combien de, beaucoup de, assez de, I'm using de to talk about that quantity and not de. Okay, so moving on to the last slide in our discussion of le verbe avoir. Okay, we also see that we have affirmative and negative and quantity expressions here. So in the affirmative, I can say j'ai des chats. So in general, I have some cats. But if I were to say j'ai beaucoup de chats, then if I'm using beaucoup, I would say de rather than des. J'ai beaucoup de chats. Okay. In the negative, je n'ai pas de chat. So I don't have cats. Je n'ai pas de chat. Okay, and after a quantity expression, again, I'm going to use de. Combien de chats as-tu? Okay, or tu as combien de chats? How many cats do you have? So if it's affirmative, I'm just stating in general, I have some cats. I'm using des. If it's negative, je n'ai pas de chat, I'm turning that des into de. And if I'm talking about a quantity, like tu as combien de chats, tu as beaucoup de chats, tu as assez de chats, in all those cases, I'm using de rather than des. Okay, after the verb être, c'est un chat. Okay, so there I'm just pointing out one cat. It is one cat. Ce n'est pas un chat. It is not a cat. And c'est beaucoup de chats. Okay, it's a lot of cats. Okay, so again, after être, if I'm just stating in general, it's a cat, it's un. If I'm saying it's not a cat, I'm using un. And again, if I'm using the quantity expression, I'm going to say de. C'est beaucoup de chats. It's probably a lot to keep track of, but I think if you just basically remember with negative expressions, with ne pas, and with quantity expressions, combien de, beaucoup de, assez de, you're going to be using de rather than des. Okay, and the last thing that we see here in this particular slide, it just gives us a mention about different nouns and how we make them plural. So anytime a noun is ending in EAU, the plural of that, basically you just add an X to the end. So un tableau becomes des tableaux, un bureau becomes des bureaux, and un animal, so very often words ending in AL often have this O ending on the end. It becomes AUX. So des animaux. Okay? And in the case of des animaux, we have a liaison between des and animaux. Okay, also mentioned here are acronyms like DVDs or CDs. They don't have any S on the end, so we have un CD or des CD or un DVD, des DVD. Okay, now that's not even completely related to the verb avoir, but I think just the fact that we're talking about quantity expressions, it's probably a good time to introduce those different forms of plural nouns. So basically, in a nutshell, It's really important at this point in your French studies to know the verb avoir inside and out, just like you should know the verb être inside and out. They should be automatic. They should, pop out of your head anytime you need to use them, because in more advanced, complicated tenses, you will definitely need to know them inside and out. And so that's everything about le verbe avoir. And we'll be moving on to more topics in video 6 coming this Friday. Bonne nuit!